Juniper Hart felt the warmth of the Florida sun caress her skin as she stepped out of the moving truck, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The air was thick with the scent of salt and sun-baked asphalt, a stark contrast to the crisp mountain breeze they had left behind in Colorado. Around her, palm trees swayed like the gentle arms of welcoming neighbors, and the vibrant colors of blooming hibiscus danced cheerfully in the soft breeze. Drake, her husband, was already fidgeting with cardboard boxes, bouncing on the balls of his feet as he surveyed their new home. The two-story house stood proud at the end of a cul-de-sac, flaunting its peach-colored exterior and tropical shutters. It looked less like a residence abode and more like a character from a suburban fairy tale. The neighborhood was a tight-knit collection of similar homes, each adorned with meticulously trimmed lawns and festive decorations that danced with the whims of the seasons. "Juniper, come check this out," Drake called, his excitement palpable. She ambled over, brushing a stray curl from her forehead, and spotted him kneeling by a verdant patch of St. Augustine grass, a slight frown etched on his brow. "Is it?" "No, it can't be," he muttered to himself, lifting a small, plastic sign from the ground. Juniper squinted at it, just managing to catch the words, "Keep off the grass." "What in the world?" she laughed, the absurdity of the sign melding with the bizarre reality of their new life. "Where are we?" "The land of no fun." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, stretching golden light toward the horizon, Juniper and Drake unpacked their belongings at a leisurely pace. The fruit of their labor, a cozy home filled with echoes of laughter, memories, and warmth, was emerging. Each box unveiled treasures of their past, and they shared stories as they sorted through their lives, reminiscing about the items in their possession. Later that evening, as they collapsed onto the couch, a low hum of laughter filled the air. It was their first night in Florida, full of potential and adventure, and sitting there, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, they felt the thrill of new beginnings. But as they settled down, Drake suddenly looked serious. "Juniper, have you seen any information about the Homeowners Association?" he asked, furrowing his brow. "No." "Is it important?" "Oh, it's vital," he replied dramatically, leaning closer as if about to share a deep secret. "They control everything, from our front yard to the color of our curtains. There are restrictions." He shot her a conspiratorial glance. "They even have meetings, with member participation." Juniper chuckled, but the seeds of curiosity began to sow themselves in her mind. Who were these people that governed their whimsical little cul-de-sac? Were they the neighborly guardians they imagined, or did they wield power like the wand of a whimsical sorcerer, dictating the terms of their suburban existence? That thought lingered over breakfast as they unpacked their kitchenware the following morning. Over the smell of fresh coffee, Drake scoured the HOA brochure he had found tucked away in a box. "Look here," he said, tapping the monochrome print. "They have rules about lawn ornaments. No flamingos, no gnomes, but, get this, they allow solar-powered tiki torches." He failed to suppress his laughter. "Who's deciding these very serious matters?" "People with strong feelings about flamingos, I guess," Juniper replied, suppressing her own giggles. "Clearly, they have a vendetta against garden gnomes." Embracing the absurdity of it all seemed to ease the tension of the impending HOA meeting that hung like a cloud over their heads. They were determined to join this curious community and perhaps make peace with its eccentricities. As the week rolled on, the sun baked their little neighborhood into a sun-kissed piece of paradise. Juniper set about creating a small garden in their backyard, while Drake tackled home improvement projects with unexpected zeal, from fixing shelves to painting the garage door an eye-popping shade of aquamarine. "Those uptight gnomes better watch out," he teased her as he painted the door. "This is going to add character." The evening of the HOA meeting arrived, thick with anticipation. They drove down the street, laughter spilling from their windows, imagining the faces of their new neighbors. The community center was luminous under the full moon, glinting off the charity banners fluttering nearby. As they entered, Juniper's heart raced with a combination of excitement and nervousness. Inside, a group of neatly dressed, Well-manicured residents congregated around a table adorned with homemade cookies and sign-up sheets. A faint murmur of chatter filled the air, reminiscent of bees buzzing in a garden. "Welcome, welcome," exclaimed Margaret, the HOA president, a woman with a short bob haircut and an energetic smile. "Thank you all for coming." Juniper and Drake exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of intrigue and disbelief as they sunk into their seats. The evening unfolded with endless discussions of bylaws, aesthetic guidelines, and community decorum. Juniper learned of new playdates, the annual neighborhood barbecue, and rules about acceptable foliage, no native florals that could attract neighborhood wildlife. Drake sat beside her, shaking his head in disbelief, but smiling all the while. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," he whispered, amused. "Are we in a sitcom?" By the end of the night, Juniper felt the warmth of the community enveloping them, whether it be overly enthusiastic or slightly peculiar. She walked out of the center with an oven mitt, her first piece of HOA swag, and a sense of belonging that they had yearned for. As they stepped back into the sultry Florida night, laughter rang like music around them, buoyed by the promise of new friendships and wild adventures. Juniper looked up at the stars and felt herself smile, a daring thought creeping into her mind. What if this HOA wasn't the end of their fun, but the beginning of an unexpected journey, one where they might discover the wild hearts beneath the well-manicured exteriors of their neighbors? And just like that, under a moonlit sky tinged with hope, she and Drake embraced their life in Florida. A world of palm trees, peculiar rules, and the promise of new escapades waiting just beyond their new front door. The sun broke through the morning clouds, painting the neighborhood in hues of gold and green, promising yet another enchanting day in Florida. Juniper busily brewed her coffee, the aroma wrapping the modest kitchen in a warm embrace. As she poured herself a steaming cup, she caught sight of Drake perched at the kitchen table, scrutinizing an intimidating stack of paper. "What's that?" she asked with a hint of amusement, sensing the tension emanating from her husband. Drake looked up, eyes wide behind his glasses. "I think I've just received the daunting initiation into our HOA," he said, brandishing a hefty black binder that loomed ominously under the morning light. He flipped it open to reveal neatly typed pages, each numbered meticulously, filling them with rules and regulations, 157 in total, heavy with the weight of authority. Juniper couldn't help but chuckle. "Are you kidding me? 157 pages? How on earth did you get that?" "Oh, he replied, the rhythm of his voice growing conspiratorial. "I mentioned at the last HOA meeting that we were newbies looking for guidance, and our dear friend Tobias Blackwood, the president, took it upon himself to personally deliver this monument to bureaucratic law."
"Ah, yes."
"The infamous Tobias," Juniper mused, her mind drifting back to the meeting. The silver-haired man had a reputation that loomed large, stern, uncompromising, and with a disarmingly sharp tongue. He had surveyed the room with hawk-like precision, his imperious presence making even the boldest members of the HOA shift uncomfortably in their seats. Drake flipped through the binder, his expression shifting from bemusement to bewilderment. "Listen to this," he said, his voice dipping as though sharing classified intel. Clause 1.2. Homeowners are required to display holiday decorations in accordance with the established seasonal themes, which must be interspersed with nature, ensuring that no lights exceed a maximum wattage of 40 per decorative unit. "Is this actually real?" Juniper burst into laughter. "Next, they'll want a committee to investigate the local fauna to ensure that nothing is upstaging the decor. Could you imagine?" "Oh, I wouldn't put it past them. Look here," he said, leveling his finger at the next page. "There's an entire section dedicated to lawn care, including acceptable grass heights and the types of fertilizer that can be used without disturbing the peace. It sounds like we're joining a cult instead of a community." They both erupted in fits of laughter, but the undertow of dread began to swirl as Drake read on. "They even have rules about the types of trees we can plant," he continued, his voice building with mock seriousness. I mean, no oaks, no magnolias, only approved beneficial species. What does that even mean? Juniper leaned closer, her curiosity piqued. Should we be taking notes? This sounds like the start of an epic journey against the tyranny of the HOA. Drake pretended to stifle a yawn, trying to rein in his laughter. We might just become revolutionaries. No more boring yards. We'll chant. The light-hearted banter quickly morphed into a game of what if, each silly thought bouncing off the walls of their kitchen like playful echoes. They crafted outrageous scenarios, envisioning secret meetings set in the shadows to rebel against the prohibition of whimsical lawn gnomes, perhaps even plotting clandestine midnight operations to sneak flamingos onto neighbors' lawns. Amid the laughter, a soft tap on the door drew their attention. Drake hopped up to answer it, revealing Tobias Blackwood, impeccably dressed in a crisp navy polo and khaki shorts. His towering figure cut an imposing silhouette, and the convivial expression on his face was caught somewhere between a frown and the hint of a smile. Mr. and Mrs. Hart, I trust you received the rules of our communities. Tobias's voice flowed like honey, though with an undercurrent of steel. We certainly did, Drake replied, trying to balance the gravity of the situation with a light-hearted bemusement. This is quite a hefty tome you've given us, Mr. Blackwood. It's an essential guide to maintaining the integrity of our beloved neighborhood, he said, stroking his chin. Perhaps I may also suggest your extra special welcome committee meeting this afternoon? Juniper felt a shiver course down her spine as she exchanged glances with Drake. A welcome committee sounded innocuous, but undoubtedly came with its own expectations and covert operations. Of course. We'd love to learn more about our new home, Juniper chimed in, summoning a cheerful smile, though anticipation swirled within her chest. Tobias nodded approvingly, handing over a neatly folded pamphlet that announced the upcoming meeting. I do encourage you to review the rules carefully, as ignorance isn't an excuse in our community. And do be on the lookout for discrepancies, should you notice any breaches during your casual wanderings. As he departed, the couple stood frozen for a moment, pondering, swirling. Discrepancies? Drake echoed. Like what? A gnome rebellion? Anarchy. In the front gardens? Juniper whipped her hair behind her shoulders, a grin stretching across her face as the sense of mischief ignited within her. What if we push the limits? After today's meeting, what if we made our yard a legend? Drake raised an eyebrow, excitement igniting in his eyes. You mean break all the rules? We could wear disguises, perhaps put on an eccentric lawn show just to provoke Mr. Blackwood. Oh, that's thrilling, Juniper mused, unable to quell the bubbling sense of adventure charging through her. Imagine the looks on their faces when we unveil our fantastical garden. And so, the plans began to unfurl beneath the golden sun, a plot blossoming like the flowers they would one day cultivate. They laughed over the thought of running amok in a sea of conformity, ready to take the reins from the stiff grip of the Homeowners Association and plant their own unique seeds of creativity within the neighborhood. Their laughter echoed into the afternoon as sunlight streamed through the windows, casting playful shadows that danced around them, a sign that perhaps chaos waited just around the corner, ready to thrive in the heart of the suburbs. Drake stepped out to collect the day's mail, the sun beating down on his back as he ambled down the sidewalk. The mailbox, a plain, brown unit at the end of the lawn, seemed to stare back at him like a harbinger of doom. He opened the hinged lid, and the soft rustle of papers greeted him. Amidst the bills and advertisements, his hand settled on a familiar, white envelope emblazoned with the HOA seal. Great, he muttered, recognizing the logo. Just what I needed, more bureaucratic nonsense. As he read through the notice, his annoyance grew. It was the 7th such letter since they'd moved in, each one chiding him for the condition of the mailbox. Excessive wear on the hinges, inadequate maintenance of the exterior surface, failure to meet the HOA's standards for mailbox appearance. It seemed every time he turned around, another infraction popped up. Drake trudged back into the house, feeling like a kid with his hand caught in the cookie jar. It's the mailbox, Juniper. They're after me for the mailbox, he grumbled. Juniper, engrossed in a book, looked up with a concerned expression. "How's it going?" "It's war," Drake replied, holding up the latest notice. "I'm being accused of mailbox neglect." 7 notices, Juniper. 7. Juniper put down her book, her brow furrowing in empathy. "I can see why that would be frustrating. Maybe we should talk to Tobias about it." Drake scoffed, tossing the notice onto the kitchen counter. "You think he cares about my mailbox woes? He's more concerned with enforcing the rules for the sake of enforcing the rules." The tension between them began to simmer, Juniper's eyes sparkling with amusement. "You're starting to sound like a rebel against the HOA's tyranny." Drake grinned wryly, the label sticking. "Hey, someone has to stand up for mailbox freedom. It's a matter of principle." Over the next few days, the mailbox notices continued to pile up. Each one brought a fresh wave of frustration, as if the HOA was trying to drill it into his head that even the smallest infractions would not be tolerated. Drake found himself checking the mailbox more frequently, half expecting to find some new offense listed in his crime sheet. One notice stood out, dated 2 weeks prior, and had somehow gone unnoticed until now. "Mailbox exterior surface. Inadequate cleaning." Drake groaned, feeling like he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He scribbled out an irate letter, only to rip it up and start anew. "To whom it may concern," he penned in red ink, before erasing the sentence and starting fresh. Juniper watched from the kitchen, suppressing a smile as the mailman's knock at the door signaled another arrival. "More HOA mail?" she asked, as he trudged back with an envelope in his hand. "Yep," Drake said, resigned, handing over the new notice. "Guess it's time for me to take a deep breath, count to 10, and respond with a cheerful smile. Or not." As he read the latest warning, regarding an obstruction to the mailbox's proper operation, Juniper leaned in and whispered, her voice filled with mischief. "You know what they say, you can't take the mailbox out of the man." Drake's expression cracked into a grin, his exasperation momentarily forgotten in the face of their absurd, ongoing battle. "I think I'll take you on as my co-conspirator. Together, we can fight the HOA's tyranny and restore mailbox justice to our neighborhood." The game, it seemed, was well and truly afoot, with the Hart household at its center, ready to take on the forces of bureaucracy and, perhaps, change the face of their suburban paradise forever. The sweltering summer sun hung high in the sky, relentless and unyielding, much like the wave of HOA notices that continuously assailed Drake over the past month. It wasn't just the mailbox anymore. It had escalated to an all-out personal vendetta. This morning's letter, a particularly scathing reprimand about the perceived chip on the mailbox's wooden frame, proved to be the breaking point. Drake marched into the kitchen, a crumpled notice in hand, fury evident in every stride. "I can't believe this. They expect me to replace an entire mailbox because of a tiny chip." His voice echoed in the room, breaking Juniper's train of thought. "What did it say this time?" she asked, setting her book aside. He unfolded the letter dramatically, reading aloud. "Mr. Hart, the visible damage to your mailbox exterior does not meet the HOA's standard for aesthetic quality. Immediate rectification is required to maintain the integrity of our community." Integrity? For a mailbox? This is ridiculous. Juniper couldn't suppress a giggle as she leaned against the counter. "True, but you have to admit the seriousness with which they treat mailbox aesthetics is rather intense." Drake tossed the letter onto the table. "Intense? This is beyond intense. The HOA has clearly lost the plot. They need to understand that real life doesn't fit their mold of perfection." He looked toward the window, where their neighbors' driveways gleamed like adoring little followers of the HOA rulebook, all pristine and excessively maintained. It seemed each house was part of an intricate puzzle where colors didn't clash, lawns were immaculate, and any hint of individuality was squashed beneath an iron fist. "Enough is enough," Drake declared, a fire dawning within him. "I'm done playing the subservient mailbox keeper. It's time to expose this hypocrisy." Juniper raised an eyebrow, sinking into curiosity. "What do you have in mind?" Drake leaned closer and lowered his voice, the glee of rebellion flaring in his chest. "I'll compile all the notices, every last one of them. I'll document the inconsistent enforcement of the rules. I'll dig up instances where other homeowners have committed gross violations without so much as a letter or a warning. It's time to show the HOA's ridiculousness to the community. Juniper's smile widened as she recognized the familiar spark in her husband's demeanor. So, you're finally channeling your inner activist? I love it. You could start a Retake the Mailbox campaign. Drake's eyes twinkled at the thought. Exactly. I won't just be the guy with a mailbox issue anymore. I'll become the voice of the people, the glorified whistleblower of the HOA's absurd standards. And so, Drake set to work, turning the kitchen into his headquarters of resistance. He spread out every notice he'd received, taping them to the walls like evidence in a courtroom. He created a log detailing when each infraction had occurred, complete with meticulously gathered evidence, photos of nearby mailboxes with far worse damage, and comparisons that read like an exposé on HOA hypocrisy. Juniper joined in, enthusiastic as she crafted a sleek pamphlet titled Neighbors United for Fair Mailbox Justice, complete with graphics and slogans. "Let's get a petition going," she suggested, her voice brimming with excitement. "We can rally the neighbors who feel the same way." "This is getting real." "Juniper," Drake exclaimed, energized by the prospect. He glanced around the decorated kitchen, the mail scrawled in various colors, suddenly a war room rather than a mere living space. "We can expose the inconsistencies." Days morphed into nights as they tackled the project with fervor. Drake's laptop hummed with data, gathering stories from disgruntled neighbors who were equally disenchanted with the HOA's micromanagement. Their frustrations poured into the document like a river overflowing its banks, and soon, the Hart household buzzed with the kind of frenetic energy that felt almost electric. As he fashioned a speech to present to the HOA board at the upcoming meeting, Drake couldn't help but notice the jittery anticipation bubbling inside him. Each violation had slowly transformed from mere irritation into fuel, igniting a passion for change. "Are you ready for this?" Juniper asked, peering through a stack of colorful pamphlets they planned to distribute. "We're ready," he asserted, his tone firm and resolute. "If we stay silent, we're part of the problem. But if we speak up, we can inspire other homeowners to join us in reclaiming our right to a little individuality." The final meeting day approached, and Drake stood before the mirror, adjusting his sleeves and rehearsing his words under his breath. He felt lightheaded, excitement tingling in his fingertips. This was it, the moment to rally the community and unite against the petty grip of the HOA. As he left the house, glancing back at the mailbox, he felt a peculiar sense of camaraderie grow within him. It had shifted from being simply wood and metal to a banner of change. Today was not just about a chipped mailbox, nor was it about him. It was the dawn of a movement, a quest to revive individuality in a world obsessed with conformity. Little did he know, standing on the precipice of conflict might lead to a revolution that extended far beyond a small struggle over aesthetics, echoing through the neighborhood, planting seeds of change in all their hearts. The battle for mailbox freedom had begun, and Drake Hart was ready to lead the charge. Chapter 5. Documenting the evidence. Drake spent the next few days immersed in his mission, fueled by the fiery resolve to stand up against the HOA's whims. Equipped with a notepad, a camera, and a full pot of coffee, he transformed his routine walks into a full-fledged fact-finding mission. With each step down the sunlit streets, he became the neighborhood's unofficial detective, surveying mailboxes as if they were clues in a grand conspiracy. The first few mailboxes he encountered stood tall and proud, showing off their polish and paint. A few even sported decorative wreaths for the season. But as he moved deeper into the enclave, reality began to tell a different story. Those perfectly manicured exteriors often concealed an inherent flaw. One mailbox was riddled with dents, its wooden shell warped by the elements, yet it bore no notice from the HOA. Across the street, another mailbox leaned precariously to one side, an obvious casualty of weathering. Not a soul had even thought to question its integrity. Across the cul-de-sac, a neighbor's mailbox was covered in graffiti from the curious hands of local teenagers, and yet there wasn't even a whisper from the HOA about it. Drake jotted down every detail meticulously, with resolute determination. Mailbox number 1. Dented, no HOA notice. Mailbox number 2. Leaning, no HOA action. Mailbox number 3. Graffiti, no repercussions. Each entry felt like a victory, a piece of evidence for the grand case he was constructing against their draconian governing body. Before long, each mailbox had its own documentation, photos, descriptions of damage, and whether they had ever been flagged by the HOA. He began to feel a sense of excitement as he imagined what this could mean for the upcoming HOA meeting. This wasn't just about him. His effort was blossoming into a well-rounded representation of the entire neighborhood's plight. Juniper joined him a few times, taking her own photos of the mailboxes and engaging in witty banter as they meandered through the suburban landscape. "Look at that one. It's practically begging for attention," she chuckled, pointing at a mailbox that had seen better days. "We should name them. Make it a gallery show," Drake replied, chuckling back. Together they named a particularly dilapidated one, Rusty the Reprobate, and a flamboyantly designed box, Dashing Derby. Laughter filled the air, momentarily dissipating the weight of their task, solidifying their resolve against the absurdity of the HOA's strict guidelines. As their documentation venture continued, they covered every corner of the neighborhood. They climbed the hill to the cul-de-sac's end and down the other side, where they noted that even some of the HOA board members had mailboxes that were expressly marked Project Unfinished, a generous term for the nearly collapsed structures that would send any inspector running. "We're going to collect evidence against the very people who enforce these ridiculous standards," Drake declared, his confidence swelling as the proverbial walls of oppression around him began to crumble. By Friday, the collection was complete. The dining room table was scattered with printouts and photographs, evidencing the inconsistencies so glaring they could no longer be ignored. Drake's heart raced with excitement as he began assembling the materials into a presentable format, ready to unveil the truth at the upcoming HOA meeting. Juniper leaned over his shoulder, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You know, when you share this, you're going to be like the Michael Collins of mailbox rights, or maybe more accurate would be John Hancock, since you can literally sign your name on this." Drake laughed, piecing everything together. "If I'm John Hancock, I want a signature larger than life. This isn't just about standing up for mailbox honor. It's about fixing a broken system." Feeling emboldened, he crafted a clear, compelling presentation set to challenge the HOA's doctrine. Each slide highlighted the discrepancies as he peppered in comments from neighbors who felt equally marginalized and disillusioned. The more he worked, the more focused and impassioned he grew. As the clock ticked down to the fateful HOA meeting, he pressed print on his neatly assembled documents, picturing the board members' faces when they were confronted with his undeniable evidence. A thrill shivered through him, not just from the thrill of confrontation, but from the hope of creating real change. On the day of the meeting, as evening descended and the neighborhood fell silent except for the rustling leaves, Drake gathered up the documents, which now felt like scrolls revealing truths that had long gone buried. With each step toward the community center, he invoked the spirits of all those homeowners who felt helpless under the crushing weight of arbitrary policy. And so, with Juniper at his side, he prepared to take the stage, not just for a mailbox, but for a slice of individuality buried beneath an oppressive rule, ready to challenge the status quo. Today, the barriers would be pulled down, and the fight for mailbox freedom would be waged. Chapter 6: The Response. The air hung thick with anticipation the morning after Drake sent his meticulously crafted email to the HOA board, detailing his findings. He sat at the kitchen table, the clink of the coffee cup breaking the silence as he fidgeted with the edges of the documents strewn across the surface, each page a testament to the mounting inconsistencies he had observed. Juniper breezed in, bright-eyed, carrying a half-empty mug of freshly brewed coffee. "Any responses yet? I can't believe you sent that email. It's like a shot heard round the neighborhood." "Not yet," he said, tapping away on his laptop and refreshing his inbox again. Each chime and ping took the air out of his lungs, and he could almost hear his racing heartbeat reverberate in the quiet room. Finally, as the morning slipped into early afternoon, the familiar ding of an incoming message rang through the air. Drake's heart leaped as he clicked on the email from Thomas Wilkins, the HOA president. He opened it, the screen glaring at him like a ticking clock, and read the words that would change everything. "Mr. Hart," it began, the formality sending a chill down his spine. "I appreciate your thorough documentation of mailbox conditions in the neighborhood. While we strive to uphold the community's standards, it seems we may have overlooked a few things in recent inspections and may need to rethink our approach." Drake inhaled deeply, his fingers hovering over the keypad. There was an unexpected softness in Wilkins' words, a deviation from the rigid, authoritative tone he had expected. Curiosity mingled with cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, he was getting through. As he continued reading, the message morphed further into a more personal tone. "I admit that I've had my own challenges with the rigidity of our rules. Sometimes, it feels we're so entrenched in maintaining a certain appearance that we forget the value of the stories behind each mailbox, the homes, the families, the lives. I would like to set a time for us to meet and discuss this further." Drake blinked, his heart racing. This was not the response he ever anticipated. The president of the HOA was expressing vulnerability? Here we read the passage, searching for any tone of condescension but found none. Instead, he saw a flicker of self-awareness. Was Wilkins genuinely willing to listen? Drake turned to Juniper, eyes wide with excitement. "You won't believe this. He wants to meet in person and talk. He actually expressed some doubts about the HOA rules." "Wow, that's huge," Juniper exclaimed. "It sounds like he's having a moment of clarity. You have to go meet him, Drake. This could be the turning point." The day moved swiftly toward their scheduled meeting at a quaint cafe nestled between flowering bushes and thick oak trees. Drake's mind raced with thoughts of what this could mean, not just for him, but for the neighborhood as a whole. A chance to create dialogue and possibly even change the HOA from within? When he arrived, he spotted Wilkins seated at a corner table, sipping a coffee with an anxious expression akin to that of a lone sheep in the midst of a pack of wolves. Drake took a deep breath, reminding himself that underneath that polished facade was a man grappling with the difficulties of leadership. "Mr. Wilkins," Drake said, extending a hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Drake, please," Wilkins replied, shaking hands. "I want this to be a conversation, not a confrontation. I must admit, I didn't think I'd be having this discussion with you after the way things had been going." Drake settled into a chair, his heart pounding but his resolve unwavering. "I understand. I sent that email because it feels like the fabric of our community is ripping apart under the pressure of imposed standards. It should be about our individuality, our stories." Wilkins nodded, looking curiously at Drake, perhaps sensing the passion in his words. "Perhaps we've overstepped. The intentions were good. We wanted to keep things looking nice, but at what cost? I can see it now that you've pointed it out. I've been out of touch." He leaned forward, a hint of vulnerability shining through.
What do we do about it?
Drake felt a rush of empowerment. Instead of focusing solely on compliance, what if we opened a conversation about individuality? Host a Mailbox Appreciation Day, where neighbors share the stories and designs behind their mailboxes? Celebrate the uniqueness we all bring. Wilkins' expression softened further. "I love that idea. This community was built on camaraderie, after all. If we can strike a balance between aesthetics and the spirit of the people living here, perhaps we can foster a greater sense of connection." As they continued to brainstorm, ideas flowed effortlessly. They discussed organizing open meetings where homeowners could voice their opinions, suggesting a reevaluation of certain guidelines, and even inviting members of the community to redesign the official checks and balances of the HOA. The seeds of understanding began to blossom into a plan, and Drake left the cafe that afternoon with a sense of allies in the battle for inclusivity instead of opposition. He had thought he was fighting against the HOA, but in truth, he might be helping it evolve. Back at home, he recounted the meeting to Juniper, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it. You turned a confrontation into a collaboration. I think this is the beginning of a whole new chapter for our neighborhood." As he settled in to draft a follow-up email to the HOA president, Drake felt the weight of his fight lift. Maybe it was no longer about merely documenting the flaws in the past, but about building a communal future, one mailbox at a time. The neighborhood didn't need an iron fist. It needed understanding, empathy, and a whole lot of individuality. Together, with a flicker of hope igniting sparkles in their eyes, they began to plan an exciting future where every mailbox would tell a story, reflecting the heart and soul of its owner. The grounds of conformity would soon yield to creativity, and their voices would mark the dawn of a new era in their community. In the days that followed Drake's pivotal meeting with Thomas Wilkins, a current of hope surged through the neighborhood. Word spread like a gentle summer breeze, igniting conversations over fences and across porches. Inspired by Drake's recent endeavors, an informal neighborhood email group began to form. It started with a few enthusiastic replies and quickly spiraled into a torrent of voices clamoring for change. Drake found himself at the center of this growing movement. Each morning, he awoke to dozens of emails from neighbors sharing their experiences. Some recounted frustrations with the HOA, while others merely shared ideas on beautifying their properties in ways that echoed their personalities, not the sterile conformity the HOA demanded. The messages fluttered in his inbox with titles such as Mailbox Madness and Our Unique Neighborhood, each bursting with creativity and passion. Within a week, the email chain had expanded to include nearly every household on the street. It buzzed with brainstorming sessions, friendly debates about community needs, and excitement about upcoming gatherings. The tone was warm yet energizing, breathing life back into a community that had once felt muted under rigid rules. One evening, Drake organized a casual meetup at the local park, encouraging neighbors to gather and share their thoughts face-to-face. As people arrived, they were greeted with laughter and warm smiles, the atmosphere electric with the anticipation of comradeship being rekindled. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Mailbox Crusader," called out Mrs. Thompson, waving a hand covered in brightly colored gardening gloves. She had taken to planting flowers around her mailbox, her way of making a statement. "Here's hoping your flower garden isn't a violation." Drake chuckled back. As more neighbors trickled in, they gathered under the gnarled oak tree that had borne witness to countless community events. There was a feeling of unity in the air. No longer were they just individual homeowners concerned about their mailboxes. They were becoming a collective force, ready to forge a blueprint for a more welcoming neighborhood. "Let's channel this energy into something productive," Drake called out, standing up so everyone could see him clearly. "We've got a chance here, not just to challenge the HOA, but to reshape how we engage with one another. The Mailbox Appreciation Day is only the beginning. Let's organize a community picnic where we can showcase our unique mailboxes, build friendships, and reshape how the HOA sees us." Nods and cheers surrounded him as discussions erupted, ideas flying through the air like confetti. They exchanged thoughts on creating a monthly community gathering to discuss neighborhood issues, gardening sessions, or movie nights under the stars. More than just an email list, this was a movement, a grassroots awakening that bred a sense of belonging and empowerment. By the end of the evening, Drake felt a fire kindling inside him, and he knew this was merely the dawn of something bigger. Inspired by their enthusiasm, he suggested they start preparing for the upcoming HOA board meeting, where he intended to present the documentation that would challenge the rigidity of the HOA. "Let's not just show the board our grievances. Let's show them who we are. This is our neighborhood, and it deserves to reflect our diversity," Drake exclaimed, and a ripple of agreement spread. He could see the determination in everyone's eyes. This was it. The neighborhood awakening had begun. The day of the HOA board meeting arrived, tension tightening the air like a drawn bowstring. A palpable sense of anticipation thrummed through the room, now musty with the weight of history. Drake stood in the backstage, but very much the star of the show. In addition to his own documentation, he'd managed to gather dozens of voices, not just in the form of emails, but signatures on a petition that echoed the community's demands for a fair coexistence with the HOA. As residents settled into their seats, Drake could see a multitude of familiar faces filled with resolve and quiet determination. With them were the boards of discontent, small makeshift props in the form of mini mailboxes that they had each decorated to reflect their unique personalities, symbolizing everything they stood for. When the president called the meeting to order, Drake felt a surge of adrenaline. He watched as Thomas Wilkins presided over the room with a nervous demeanor, the confidence he had once exuded now tempered by the collective gaze of a community ready to confront him. "Now, let's move on to community concerns," Wilkins announced, and Drake knew it was time. He stood, smoothing down his shirt as he made his way to the front, papers clutched tightly in his hand. The room fell silent, the focus shifting entirely onto him. The pathway leading to the podium felt as though it spanned miles, with his heart pounding in his chest. This was his moment to not only present evidence, but to elevate the voices of so many who had felt unheard. "Thank you, Mr. Wilkins, and to the members of the board for allowing me to speak today," he began, projecting steadily. "I'm here not just as an individual voice, but as a representative of our community." Drake took a deep breath, glancing at familiar faces who offered nods of encouragement. "As you know, I've spent a great deal of time documenting the state of our neighborhood's mailboxes, but what I discovered goes far beyond the mere aesthetics of our postal receptacles." He gestured toward the small mailboxes seated on tables in the front row. "These represent our individuality, our stories, our lives. They symbolize the beauty in our diversity, which is what makes our neighborhood worth cherishing." He proceeded to unveil the organized evidence of mailbox violations amidst the strict rules delineated by the HOA. Each point was met with murmurs of surprise and indignation, the tension mounting as he presented photographs of neglected mailboxes, many of which belonged to board members themselves. "But this isn't just about the mailboxes," he said, feeling his confidence swell as he continued. "It's about fostering a sense of belonging and developing engagement with our community. After all, we all want our children to grow up in a neighborhood that reflects the joyful chaos of life, not a stale facade of perfection." As he finished showcasing the community petition, signatures pouring in from neighbors who yearned for a more inclusive approach, Wilkins shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The reality of the situation began to settle in. The board was no longer an initial authority. It was now facing a community united under a banner of change. So today, I ask you to consider an alternative path. Why not allow ourselves to embrace diversity and individuality, instead of suffocating it under rigid rules? Drake concluded, his words hanging in the room like an echo, resonating deeply. The murmurs grew louder, hesitant but compelling. Residents began showing support, standing up to voice their own experiences and frustrations, each eager to share their vision for a neighborhood free of the restrictive constraints imposed by an outdated governance. It was electric. The energy crackled through the air as one by one, neighbors voiced their opinions, each turning towards the board, demanding not just fairness in rule enforcement, but a collaborative approach to their community. Chapter 9. The Vote of No Confidence. The spirited discussions that had unfolded during the HOA board meeting transformed into an unstoppable wave of momentum. In the days that followed Drake's impassioned plea, a grassroots movement blossomed in the neighborhood. Flyers proliferated, calling for a special emergency meeting, a vote of no confidence for the existing HOA board members, which was to take place in just a couple of weeks. Residents rallied with fervor, determined to create a new set of guidelines that were fair, engaging, and inclusive. Drake became the unofficial leader of this movement, working diligently alongside neighbors to draft proposed rules that prioritized community camaraderie over stringent conformity. The basis of their new framework emphasized individuality, community gatherings, and shared celebrations. Each mailbox, garden, and chandelier would become a point of pride, rather than a point of contention. As the date for the emergency vote approached, excitement surged, not just within the confines of email chains, but across the entire neighborhood. A sense of hope buoyed everyone, and disbelief began to permeate the air. The tide had turned against the old guard, and it was exhilarating. On the day of the meeting, the atmosphere was electric. Residents filled the community center, their faces alight with anticipation. As neighbors exchanged pleasantries and laughter, the once dominant board members sat rigidly at the front, their expressions betraying a mix of irritation and mounting concern. Drake stood at the front of the room, ready to advocate for the changes they had drafted. The energy was palpable, and as he spoke, he felt an incredible sense of pride. Today, we're reclaiming our neighborhood. This community is not defined by a handful of outdated regulations. It's defined by all of us. We deserve a welcoming space that reflects who we truly are. The room erupted with cheers and applause, a growing chorus of voices united in agreement. Neighborhood representatives spoke passionately about their visions for a more collaborative and vibrant community, each one resonating with those gathered. As the board members listened to the collective energy of the community, their power began to slip away, a slow and inevitable erosion. When it came time to vote, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The old guard was at the precipice of being toppled by a new wave of homeowners, eager to establish a modified governance. As the votes were tallied, silence fell over the room. Drake's heart raced in anticipation, his eyes darting among the faces around him. Finally, when the results were announced, the cheers that erupted were deafening. The vote of no confidence had passed overwhelmingly. Effective immediately, we will begin the transition to a new HOA, Drake announced, barely able to contain his joy. The old board's authority crumbled like a sandcastle against a tide it could not withstand. New representatives were elected, 2 from his network of email collaborators, people passionate about fostering a sense of community rather than strangleholding it with rules. Under the guidance of the new HOA, thrilling changes unfolded for the neighborhood. The rules shifted to focus on facilitating community-building events, allowing residents to express their identities freely. The first annual Mailbox Appreciation Day was a resounding success, followed by neighborhood potlucks, movie nights, and gardening weekends, each event weaving the fabric of camaraderie tighter. As the years went by, Drake and his neighbors settled into their new lives with pride and joy. The spirit of the neighborhood flourished, and the collective identity blossomed as stories were exchanged and friendships deepened. Life seemed full and vibrant, the oppressive shadow of the old HOA rules vanquished by unity and shared purpose. However, one fateful day, while assessing the small vacant lot he owned at the edge of the community, Drake was struck by a peculiar sight. Laughter rang out, creating a rush of playful energy that drew him near. What he saw sent shockwaves through him. A beautiful new community pool had been constructed on his property. "Excuse me," he exclaimed, approaching a small group of children splashing in the water, their laughter infectious. "What on earth happened here?" The nearest parent smiled sheepishly as they stepped out from under the shade of an umbrella.
Oh,
"Didn't you hear? The HOA has decided this was the perfect space for a community pool."
I didn't authorize that,"
Drake exclaimed, a mixture of disbelief and frustration bubbling inside him. The parent nodded, a hint of sympathy in their eyes. The board mentioned that they believed it would benefit the neighborhood. They figured since this lot was empty, it was a win-win for everybody. Drake felt his head spinning. His face flushed with both anger and incredulity. The new HOA's enthusiasm for community building had spiraled into an arbitrary decision that arguably overstepped boundaries. Had they forgotten about consent amid their passion for bringing people together? Taking a deep breath, he decided to turn to the neighborhood he had fought so hard to uplift. He quickly composed a message to the email group that had started it all, calling for a gathering to address this unexpected twist. To reclaim the dialogue surrounding the use of shared spaces, they would need to negotiate a new vision for the neighborhood's resources. When the crowd gathered the next day, he shared his concerns, framing it not just as his lot, but as part of a larger discussion around community ownership and the respect of personal boundaries. We've rejoiced in creating something beautiful together, but we must ensure we're all on board when shaping our resources. Let's discuss what this pool truly represents for everyone. As the group engaged in thoughtful dialogue and shared their thoughts, the tone shifted from outrage to collaboration. Ideas emerged from all corners, forming consensus on shared ownership over community assets. They began to brainstorm about how they could sustainably manage the pool while respecting personal boundaries, ensuring that each resident felt heard. Drake reflected on how far they had come. The initial struggle against a rigid authority that had set them free now intertwined with the newfound responsibility they all shared. It was a deliberate dance between creativity and accountability, a testament to what they had forged together. What had once threatened to be a point of contention turned into another chapter in the vibrant tapestry of their evolving community. As they all sat around the cooling evening air, laughter mixed with ideas sparked into life, and Drake knew they would find common ground, maintaining the spirit of what it meant to belong, a delicate balance that ultimately defined their unique neighborhood. Chapter 13. Going Public. The day dawned bright and clear, but inside Drake's home, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Armed with his newly acquired knowledge of the zoning regulations, he was ready to take a bold step forward. For too long, the HOA had operated with impunity, disregarding individual property rights, and he knew it was time to shine a light on their transgressions. Drake crafted a social media campaign that blended fact and emotion. He constructed a powerful narrative surrounding the HOA's illegal construction of the neighborhood pool on his vacant lot, framing it as a violation not just of his rights, but of the values the entire community stood for. His posts combined excerpts from zoning laws with personal stories from fellow residents about how the HOA's overreach affected their day-to-day lives. Homeowners are being bullied into silence. While the HOA disregards our property rights, he declared in one of his posts, sharing images of the pool in various stages of construction along with his own heartfelt reflections. Stand up for what's right. Let's demand accountability from those we entrusted with our community. The campaign ignited like wildfire, touching the hearts of hundreds, then thousands, as neighbors and even those from distant neighborhoods began sharing and commenting. Hashtags like #ProtectOurProperties and #StandWithDrake began to trend, drawing local media outlets' attention. The public outrage reached a fever pitch, with local news channels running stories about the HOA's unauthorized construction. For the first time, the residents felt empowered to voice their frustration, and the tide began to shift against the once mighty board. Within days, local authorities received numerous complaints, and an investigation was launched into the HOA's construction practices. As journalists interviewed residents, a palpable sense of community emerged, binding people together in their shared commitment to uphold personal rights over tyranny. Even as the HOA scrambled to save face, manipulating the narrative to paint themselves as champions of community spirit, it was clear they were on shaky ground. The investigation pressed forward, and the pressure mounted as local officials inspected the pool site, discovering the blatant violations of zoning regulations. When the announcement came that the HOA was forced to cease construction and dismantle the pool, a wave of celebration engulfed the neighborhood. Drake organized an impromptu gathering at the very spot where the pool once stood, now a symbol of their shared struggles and triumph. Fueled by a sense of unity, neighbors mingled and shared their ideas about transforming the space into a community oasis that everyone could enjoy, an actual shared backyard paradise. Drake emerged as a leader, rallying the group to brainstorm how they could collectively turn this setback into something extraordinary. Let's create something magical where families can come together, where children can play freely, and where we can host cookouts and movie nights under the stars. "This can be our family haven," he proposed passionately, and the excitement was infectious. By uniting their resources and commitments, the residents pooled their skills. Some were excellent gardeners, others had backgrounds in landscaping, and a few even owned local businesses dedicated to creating outdoor spaces. They banded together, sketching out plans for community gardens, picnic areas, and a fire pit for cozy gatherings. Word spread quickly about their endeavor, and Drake's social media presence once again played a crucial role. They titled the project The Neighborhood Haven and launched a crowdfunding campaign to raise additional funds for materials, promising transparency and ownership of the space to all residents. People from nearby neighborhoods, and even strangers drawn in by the charm of their mission, contributed and volunteered, curious to see the transformation. The community momentum became palpable as the group worked together, digging, planting, and building every weekend. Amidst the labor of love, the community began to redefine their identity, not merely homeowners within an HOA, but active participants in the community structure. They scheduled regular meetings, emphasizing collaboration rather than confrontation, and the warmth of unity blossomed where division once flourished. Meanwhile, the HOA was left scrambling, its reputation tarnished. Karen and the old board members attempted to respond, but their previous claims of community benefits fell flat amidst newfound accountability and widespread resentment. As the shared backyard paradise took shape, a sense of pride replaced the envy and frustration that had once permeated their lives. On opening day, families spilled into the newly transformed space, laughter echoing through the garden where the pool once stood, a collective dream now realized. The sun hung low in the sky as children dashed through the butterfly garden and parents gathered around tables adorned with homemade treats. Drake stood at the center, soaking in the genuine joy that surrounded him. He marveled at how adversity had forged an unbreakable bond among neighbors. Unity, collaboration, and love defined this rebirth, far eclipsing the HOA's attempt to control. What had been a simple lot had blossomed into a cherished community treasure, a reflection of their resilience, growing stronger each day, weaving the fabric of an even more vibrant neighborhood. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow on the smiling faces gathered together, Drake realized that fighting for what was right had led him to a dream even grander than he initially envisioned, a life woven with meaning, community, and friendship. His heart swelled with pride, grateful for the journey, the struggle, and ultimately the triumph that had brought them all together.